Yeah, my name is Chris Charles and I am Head of Creative Development at the Men's Room. It's a creative organisation that is supported by a 360-degree wraparound of health and social care. We work specifically with men, so we're gender specific, 18 to 30 years of age. That can stretch a little bit because some of the work we do through our detached, we may engage younger, and we will always engage, or older. We have our detached work, which is straight on the street, where a lot of the men are either sleeping rough or selling sex. We have creative provisions on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and we also have one-to-one support that is historically very much about the health and social care, but latterly has started to become about the creative as well, which is really quite new and exciting for me. But yeah, the whole kind of idea is that the arts, the creativity is an intervention for the men, but it's also a place and a space where you can start to build trust and conversation and relationships, because the core of the Men's Room is about relationship. It's about working with people at a pace, on a level of understanding that allows them to access. We are very, I suppose, client driven in the fact that we adapt our delivery, we adapt our approach. We're quite, because of our size, able to be quite personalised. Our remit is about working with men in crisis. I think that's quite an important thing to say. And that crisis can be around any aspect of their lives, but kind of historically we've engaged a lot of men that have had experience of the criminal justice system, probation, street homelessness, sex work, exploitation and trafficking. So yeah, that's what we set up to do, and we're kind of 10 years old and still going. So there's something about the progression of the creativity within the Men's Room. There is very much a methodology and an approach of delivery, but I think that there is space for whoever is within that as the creative working with the men to bring and adapt what that creative intervention is. So historically I got involved with a lot of projects and processes as a volunteer 7-8 years ago, and a lot of the work was based very much on drama as an interaction. And I think for me, kind of coming through the gears of having my own practice and my own delivery in other projects, and being invited to come along by the old CEO, Graham Irwin, to get involved, because I was delivering a piece of work with him at the Lowry Theatre at the time. He thought it'd be interesting because of my approach to come and meet with the lads. And it was also, I think, a little bit of a challenge, because it's kind of the first time kind of photography had been talked about in that space, and photography is a very powerful medium because it captures a piece of theatre. For me, is lovely in the fact that you build a process, you build a relationship, you come to a sharing, it's shared, and then it's the memory of the thing that is what you take away. A photograph or a film leaves a much stronger representation of what that moment in time was, and that moment in time can change for people. So you could capture an image of someone whilst they were in a crisis within their lives and they were selling, and that image could still be looked at 5 to 10 years later on, where potentially they've moved on from that, they have a life and they've made choices that have moved them away from that lifestyle. So photography and film, within the nature of the work of the Men's Room, brings up a lot of conversation. Obviously you've asked me about some imagery because my creative background is photography and filmmaking. Yeah, so I kind of access things and I see things, and I enjoy explaining things in a visual way. There was a lad that was there on that evening that had exited sex work, but he was back in Manchester and he was just touching base, which again is something for me which is beautiful about the Men's Room, is that it is that open door policy. Come back and share what you're doing, don't just come and work with us and then leave. It has that feeling around it. Not saying any names for confidentiality reasons, but could you show me where you used to hang out in town, where you used to work, where where was your patch in some respects? And the lad in question very quickly kind of got on board with it and was supported by Graham as well, and Kate at the time, who was head of creative then. And we went down to a corner within the village, which is, he said, this was my spot. And I was like, okay, do you mind if I take a portrait? It's going to go nowhere, but it might be something for you to hold as a memory, for the men's room to hold as a memory of your achievement in some respects of moving away from this spot and actually getting a different sort of life going. And he was up for it, and he looked, what was amazing for me was, as a photographer, you kind of have to find that relationship. I'm all about portraiture, it's my favourite form of photography, but for me, if you haven't got a connection with somebody, you're not going to see that person. And what this lad did straight away was just give himself. He showed me his vulnerability, he showed me, in some respects, a little bit of the pain of being back in the spot that he'd used to work from. And he was very specific about how he stood and showing the sign on the broken window which said open, and he said that's very much a reflection of how I felt. I was always open for business, but that was because I felt broken inside. And he put that metaphor in there without even thinking about it. And I came away from that first interaction just going, as a photographer, what a shot. But then as a human being going, I can't show that anybody. And that became, for me, the journey within the delivery of the men's room that has always been the challenge of trying to create a process for the men where they acknowledge themselves as creatives, they build a statement and an intent about their lives from the present day, not the past. Yes, share that, because that's where we can support in all the other health and social care, housing, meds, addictions, whatever it is. That's great, but for me the creativity more and more becomes about a pathway of choice. So it's not so much about, yes it's drama, yes it's photography, whatever art form, it's just being creative, and that gives you a resilience to what life throws at you. In a split second of taking that picture, I went, this could be a great exhibition, but that was all about me. I'm not going to show anybody this shot, but we're going to use it as a point of conversation as to how we represent the men moving forward as the men's room. It's a portrait but taken in a landscape style, and we did that for a reason, because what we wanted to show was the young man in the shot was to one side of the window on the corner of the street where he used to stand every night and sell from. It is in the evening. It's illuminated by the street, by the open sign itself, which is like a fluorescent orangey, hot orangey, pinky glow that is lighting the young man, and you can very much see the damage to the window and the bars that the windows are protected by. And yeah, as I say, the young man is stood kind of side on, letting his face be illuminated, but he's looking me straight down the lens. I think kind of the survival life and everything, and then that's kind of some spoken word that was produced by the shadowed man that you can see in this picture.
Okay.
Yeah. So for me, there's something there about the men's room and about the men that we engage, is that they, as part of this process, kind of Surviving Manchester, which is a book that we produced. You can kind of see on here as well, it became about representation in a different way. It was about the eyes, yeah, and there's always this conversation about, yeah, but you don't see through my eyes, Chris.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of, yeah, you can walk alongside me, I'll show you a part of my life, but you don't see my life through my eyes. So I think with the men that we work with, there's that constant relationship of being the shadow, but then coming into a space and becoming somebody, being supported, being in a group of men that are going through similar situations, using the creativity to explore some of the emotion and some of the anger and some of the feelings around what they're going through. But one step removed, it's kind of, we're making this thing, but it's not me. And that comes back to that initial conversation, the initial picture, and this kind of shot that you've just filmed, is that the men will talk about, we have routes through Manchester where the CCTV cameras don't see us, nobody sees us, we're like shadows. They're living in survival mode. They are, I was talking about it today with one of the young men, it's almost like I'm living a life that isn't legit, and it's very hard to step from a life of selling or criminality into a life of being responsible for your bills, having a house. And sometimes that level of support isn't what they need at the beginning, because having that pressure is the thing that sends them back, if that makes sense. So we use the creative to explore and play and find different ways of communicating, and we're very upfront about it. I think the men's room has always had the policy of be authentic, be transparent. Whatever you do, if you say you're going to do something, do it. You don't add to someone's lack of trust of the world. You try and meet that head on and sort of say, you asked me to do something and I agree with what you're asking. I'm going to do it for you. Consistency, continuity, one staff member speaking as the other. It's everyone being on the same page at the same time. So when that person walks through the door, they get the same interaction, the same level of understanding. It's not like a knockback, like I can't speak to you, I need to speak to another member of staff. You can speak to anybody, because we all know what's going on. And this one, for me, again, you're filming it, but I'll read it. Yeah. I've never had a place that's helped me without being judgmental about the way I am, my personality, or how I am perceived to be. My dream in life is to be a writer. I am most proud of my poetry, but I'm most ashamed of what my poetry means. I am most scared of success. My bedroom is trees and concrete. There's something in that for me that always resonates about how we have to look to build the creative with the men. As much as everybody for funding and for everything else wants to go, this is really high level arts and this is this and this is this, isn't it great, and you should fund more of it. I always have this little voice in the back of my head that says, who are we measuring that achievement against and for? Because if it steps for me outside of measuring that for the men, then we're bringing an additional stress into that man's life to achieve something that they're potentially scared of. I've never heard anyone say, I want to be, what's the word, informally educated. Yeah, stealth education, slip that in round the back of, oh, we'll do an arts project, but we'll be teaching them about confidence building. You can't do any of that sort of stuff with the men we work with. They see you coming an absolute mile off and they throw it back in your face and have a laugh with you about it. They will tell their story the way they want to tell their story. The creative role within that interaction is finding a way that that story can be shared and protect the man that's trying to tell it in the process. I don't like, and I'm actually quite against, pieces of theatre that is about putting already vulnerable people on stage to talk about their vulnerabilities and share where their life was damaged to a point where they needed the support about their vulnerability. This cycle of we're working with the most marginalised, let's put them on stage, takes me back to the bedlams of the 1845s. Let's roll the mad people out for the Victorians. Do you know what I mean? Absolutely does my head in. So there's a level of protection within that relationship, but there's also a level of expectation that is agreed between the organisation and the men, because I'm very about process and, for want of a better term, product, because the process is very important, but without the sharing of that process, how can you actually measure what you've achieved? I was with a young man earlier today and I wrote something down that he said. I always look back to see how far I've come, and the men's room has been a big part of that journey. Yeah, for me, the acknowledgement of his past as a way of reinforcing the positive of his future, I get. But if that person is constantly being asked to stay in their mind and stay in the negative, why are you here? What are your problems? Let's talk about it. How can you expect that person to move on? And I think creativity at the men's room is that vehicle. It is that way of building a relationship and a bond of trust. And it's about allowing additional support to come in around the edges as that person asks for it. And I'm going to stop there.